Why do you think that leaders hide from funding their vision? And how can then those leaders lean into funding that vision?
I think there's a real fear of failure. And there's a lot of self doubt, which leads leaders to question the feasibility or the worthiness of their vision. So it can often make them avoid seeking funding because they fear they'll be rejected. And this is something we see not just for leaders, I see this really commonly across the board.
Mm,
And then there's also imposter syndrome. We tend to think of that occurring at kind of lower levels, but leaders with self doubt may often have exactly the same experience. And that's what I have noticed when I'm training, that a lot of leaders, they're not as comfortable to speak up and say they're suffering with imposter syndrome because they feel that it's something that lower level employees should experience, but they should know exactly what they're doing. But imposter syndrome is very, very normal, no matter what level you work at. And really, one of the best ways to combat self doubt is to use it as a signal for growth. So it's often a signal that you care deeply about your vision. We tend to think of self doubt as I'm not good enough, but often it really is just I care so much that there's a lot on the line. And
mm,
when you kind of reframe it like that of it's normal to have a little bit of self-doubt. And actually, when you see individuals that are so confident that there's no doubt at all,
mhm,
often they're the ones that falter because it's that little bit of doubt, that passion, that drive to do better that can often make you perform at your best because you also realize that there's room for improvement. So
mm,
when you reframe that mentally as instead of a failing, it's an opportunity to refine your pitch and maybe even deeper your conviction. And also, when we talk about imposter syndrome, I think one really important thing is just normalizing vulnerability
mm.
because leaders feel like they have to be impenetrable,
Yes.
and that's just not feasible. But it's not often talked about by leaders because
Mhm,
again they want to be the person that people look to. So how can I show vulnerability? But actually what the research shows is that when leaders show vulnerability, they're perceived as more authentic, and people prefer to be led by people that they see as human with
mhm,
human flaws. But instead of just saying, I can't do this or I'm scared of doing this, you have to layer it as I get nervous over these things too, but here's what I do to keep myself moving forward. So
mhm.
frame it as a positive, but be open about your vulnerability and your fears too.
Um, yeah, it's crazy that you mentioned that because a lot of times, like when I connect to leaders and I'm talking to them, um, I feel more connected if they're able to be more vulnerable with me,
Yeah,
and I'm more likely to work with them and beside them if they are more vulnerable, if they
yeah,
are, and it also gives you a chance to see them in a human light where, man,
yes,
they went through what you do, maybe they're going through what you do, and if they can do it, so can you.
yeah.
So there's a harmony in that, and the greatest leaders actually practice what you just mentioned.
Yep,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah.
And leaders also feel like they kind of have to be perfect
Hmm.
and they must be flawless. And again, that's another reason why it can stop them seeking funding. But again, that perfectionism is an impossible goal. And when other leaders get together and say, hey, I struggle with this too, it's a little reminder of, you know what, even the people that I look at and think are perfect, they have vulnerabilities too, and they have a little bit of self-doubt too. So it's just normalizing that to lower levels, but also within networking communities.
Yeah. But the difference with just sharing your vulnerabilities, vulnerabilities, and great leaders is they
Mhm.
know how much to be, how much to share at the
Yes.
right time
Yes.
and for the right amount that
Yeah.
uplifts and brings in the conversation together instead of bringing it down. Uh,
Yeah.
they are very, very good at that. I think that's something I aspire to be,
Yeah,
getting
you
that
make a
right
great
person.
point about sharing versus oversharing.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, when it comes to you, Abby,
Mhm.
what were some of the times where maybe you were like, I think I'm hiding from funding my vision, and what did you do to overcome that?
Well, I definitely had the overemphasis on perfection
Mm-hmm.
too. I have through my whole career. I have felt like everything I put out has to be 100% perfect
Mm,
because I recognize the importance of reputation. So my thinking was if my reputation falters even a little bit, then it's
right.
going to negatively affect me. But what I found was I wasn't putting things out at a fast enough pace, and I was questioning myself so much that I was overthinking things that didn't need to be thought about so deeply. And it was hindering me. But when I had that realization of it doesn't need to be perfect, but I know I have to put my all in.
Mm-hmm.
But there has to be a point where you say, I can't keep going at this. So I
Mm-hmm.
spent a lot of time recognizing where that limit was for me of I still drive to do the absolute best that I can with everything that I put out, but I also recognize that there's going to be flaws. Even when I published my first book, when I reread it recently and I noticed little typos and things I would change, and I could have kept going and going and going. And I'm writing a new book now, and I'm reminding myself of that learning process of doesn't have to be perfect because it's never going to be perfect, but you do have to put it out.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think that was very insightful. Abby, what tips would you have for um, leaders and entrepreneurs, in your opinion?
I think the most important thing with entrepreneurs and leaders, really, if you get down to it, is the why.
Mm,
What is your purpose behind the vision? What is the passion there? What is that anchor point that is your mission? Because your why, it needs to be understood by everybody else. Because why would they go to you? What is it that makes you special? But more importantly, you need to understand it because your why can't come later. That driving force has to be the foundation of everything you build because otherwise you're going to end up doing so many different things and you're going to feel a little bit discombobulated, and it's like I'm doing this but this doesn't make me that happy and everything feels a little bit scattered. But my why is making science accessible, and
mm,
everything I do is driven by that core mission, that core purpose, something that just I wake up in the morning and it's my passion and it drives me. And before you go and put out funding calls or anything or content, figure out your why.
um, Thank you for sharing that. I think this goes directly into my next question about your why.
Yeah.
Me and you talked about your why last time you came on the show, but I think our audience will really, really benefit about talking about some of the stories that pertain
Yeah.
to your why are very inspiring. I think I'd love to hear those.
I said my motto is making science accessible,
Yeah.
but it really goes so much deeper than that. It's not just my love for science and content and psychology. It's that I truly believe that education is a lifeline,
Mm,
especially psychology. When I was very young, I was in a very difficult place. I had a difficult upbringing, and I was kicked out of college, kicked out of home,
mhm,
but I managed to get back in with my psychology teacher. And psychology became the first thing I'd ever really been good at, and the first thing I ever really had an interest in.
mhm,
And when I started to develop that and go, okay, well, maybe I could be good at this, then I started to see my grades increase. And then because it was psychology, I started to understand myself.
mm,
And that became the lifeline for me. And from that point, I was so driven to just answer questions because there are things that we don't know about people. We don't know about how to be the best leader or the best partner or anything.
mhm,
But science has a lot of those answers. So for me, it was being part of the solution to creating an answer about human behavior that wasn't known. And I just fell in love with that. And I
Mhm.
realized that as amazing as science is, and how many answers we have to questions that we don't even know to ask sometimes, it's not always accessible. And that's why I moved out from being a full-time academic and moved into the private sector, because I realized in academia, it's thriving with science knowledge. That's the
Mhm.
point. But outside of academia, it's not always accessible because of a lack of understanding of the language, the terminology behind paywalls, just generally not being able to understand research papers because they are very complicated. And I
Mhm.
recently got asked, well, how do you know what's a valid paper and what isn't? And my only real answer is when you do a PhD and when you get to the point of a full time academic, you've been training for years, as a reviewer, as a scientist, to get that qualification. Part of the assessment is, are you able to critically assess research papers and write research papers? So you
Mhm.
go through years and years and years of training to understand how to read science. That's not something you can expect someone who hasn't dedicated their life to science to do, and nor should we. So we need to find a way to make that more accessible. So for me, when I see someone who doesn't think that they love science, doesn't think they like science, or doesn't think they can understand it, when I see a little spark of passion in them of, oh, I get this, and I see a little bit of passion or a little bit of excitement, or I see just that growth of knowledge, for me, that's the best feeling in the world. So that's my why, that making science accessible.
Thank you for being here today. I'm really happy that you tuned in to Vision Pros Live. I'm looking forward to seeing your reactions as these episodes continue to move forward. This is going to get more and more fun. We'll have more and more engagement as well. We'll invite people to participate in the show. And thank you for giving us your time and attention. Have an excellent time building out your vision and becoming a Vision Pro yourself.